London breathed in silvery ribbons of fog on the evening Henrietta Blythe first understood what it meant to fall from grace. The year was 1817, and though the city hummed with the season's usual frenzy, carriages rattling toward lamplit avenues, orchestras rehearsing waltzes behind gilt doors, Henrietta walked with the careful quiet of a woman newly aware that every gaze could judge her. Only a month earlier she had been greeted with gentle nods and polite invitations. Now she was an afterthought, drifting at the edges of the very society she had once moved through with modest confidence. Her father's sudden debts had stripped the Blythe name of its luster, and with his passing, she found herself clutching the frayed remnants of respectability like a shawl too thin for winter. At the small assembly hosted in a rented hall off Hanover Square, her humiliation arrived not as a blow, but as a whisper that spread faster than candle smoke. A pair of young ladies, resplendent in fresh silk, surveyed her with a mixture of pity and disdain. "She hopes someone will ask her," one murmured, glancing sidelong at Henrietta's carefully repaired gown. "But hope is all she has left." Their words drifted toward her with cruel precision. Though she kept her chin lifted, her pulse quivered at her throat. She understood then how swiftly society could redraw a person's worth. The quadrille began, and for a moment she believed fortune might offer her a small mercy. A gentleman, an acquaintance from earlier seasons, stepped toward her, bowing with the polite stiffness of habit. She accepted his hand, grateful for the chance to move, to disappear into the rhythm of the dance. But scarcely halfway through, his expression tightened as an older matron signaled to him from the edge of the floor. He released Henrietta with an apologetic grimace and withdrew to join companions of better standing. She remained in the center of the room, alone as the figures shifted and music continued without her. The shame prickled her skin, yet she held her position for several breaths before gliding to the side with what she hoped resembled unbroken composure. It was then that she noticed him. Lord Tristan Harland, Duke of Ashworth, stood amidst the whirl of dancers like a marble figure misplaced among silk and color. Tall, impeccably restrained, he possessed the kind of presence that silenced a room without a word. His dark hair, neatly brushed, framed features arranged with aristocratic severity, handsome in a way that distanced rather than invited. Known throughout London as the Cold Duke, he was admired for his discipline, feared for his detachment, and endlessly discussed because no one had ever seen him falter. Tonight, however, his gaze rested on Henrietta with a stillness that unsettled her more than the dancers' whispers. He did not move toward her, nor offer even the faintest gesture of sympathy. He simply watched, observant, unreadable. It was the kind of scrutiny that suggested calculation rather than kindness, yet it held her captive nonetheless. She quickly turned away, but the sensation of his attention lingered like a touch she had not agreed to. When the assembly concluded, she walked home under the faint drizzle, telling herself she imagined the Duke's interest. Men like him had no reason to look twice at women who had slipped from society's favor. Yet the next morning, as she sat mending the seam of her glove, a letter arrived bearing the seal of Ashworth. She stared at the emblem, an austere crest pressed into deep red wax, her heart fluttering between dread and disbelief. Inside, written in a firm hand, was a brief summons requesting her presence at his residence that very afternoon. No explanation followed. No polite preamble softened the command. Henrietta considered ignoring it, for what could the Duke of Ashworth possibly want with her? But necessity had a way of shaping courage. With dwindling funds and no prospects, she could not afford to dismiss any opportunity, even one cloaked in uncertainty. Ashworth House loomed with severe elegance, its stone facade gleaming beneath a pale sun. Servants guided her through corridors lined with ancestral portraits, rigid men and cool-eyed women who seemed to study her as intently as their descendant had the night before. When she entered the Duke's study, he was already standing beside the window, hands clasped behind his back, posture impeccable. He turned only slightly when she curtsied. "Miss Blythe," he said, his voice controlled, devoid of warmth yet not unkind. You are punctual. I believed it best not to keep your grace waiting, she replied, forcing steadiness into her tone. He regarded her as if assessing not merely her appearance, but her resolve. Last night, he began, I observed your comportment under unfortunate circumstances. Her cheeks heated, though she maintained composure. I regret that you witnessed it, Your Grace. I do not, he said. It confirms something I have been evaluating for several weeks. He stepped toward his desk, lifting a document sealed with fresh wax. I require a partner for the upcoming London season, not a wife, he added sharply, before she could misunderstand. A partner, a woman who can dance with me, divert attention, and counter the persistent rumor that I am, how shall I put it, incapable of social warmth. Henrietta blinked, the proposition startling in its bluntness. You wish to hire me? She asked softly. His gaze sharpened. You are not wife material, Miss Blythe. I hired you to dance. Nothing more. The words struck with such precision that she inhaled a thin breath to steady herself. Yet behind the sting lay a lifeline, employment, purpose, a chance to reclaim some fragment of respectability. She met his eyes, surprised by the flicker of something restless in their depths. If dancing is all you require, she said quietly, then I accept. For the first time, the Duke's expression shifted, barely but undeniably. Not satisfaction, something closer to curiosity. And as she signed the agreement with ink that trembled faintly on the quill, she sensed the air change, as though a door she had never intended to open had creaked wide, revealing a path neither she nor the cold Duke would be able to retreat from. The arrangement began with a formality that felt almost surgical, as though the Duke of Ashworth intended to keep each boundary carved into stone. Henrietta arrived at his residence for the first of their scheduled rehearsals, unsure whether she should brace herself for scrutiny or silence. She found him in the ballroom, a vast chamber of polished floors and tall windows, standing with the rigid stillness he seemed born to command. Sunlight cast sharp lines across his tailored coat, illuminating a man who moved only when absolutely required. When he addressed her, his tone was clipped, precise, proving that their contract had not softened him overnight. Yet even within that austerity, something in his gaze betrayed a keen awareness of her presence, as though he had studied not only her posture, but the subtle endurance beneath it. Their first dance was a lesson in restraint. Henrietta placed her hand lightly atop his, surprised by the strength she felt, controlled and deliberate. Tristan guided her into the opening steps with mechanical precision, but the moment she corrected the angle of his shoulder, he stiffened, as though unfamiliar with being directed. Your Grace, she murmured, if you ease the tension a little, you may appear less forbidding. His brow arched in cool disbelief, but he complied, adjusting by fraction rather than measure. Despite his reluctance, the shift transformed the line of his frame, lending him an ease he had never bothered to cultivate. She recognized in him a man shaped by duty, not desire, a man who had spent decades perfecting discipline but had never been taught the gentler art of pleasing a room. They practiced for nearly an hour, and though his corrections of her steps were brusque, his attention never wavered. She noticed that he observed more than he spoke, filing away tiny details. The way she smoothed her gown when nervous, the slight hesitation before placing her hand in his, the quick intelligence with which she adapted to his rhythm. By the end of their rehearsal, his movements had softened, and hers had gained new confidence. When their hands parted, she felt the faintest tug of something unspoken, but neither acknowledged it. Their debut as a pair occurred 2 evenings later at the Marchmont Ball, a glittering affair that promised both opportunity and peril. London's elite had gathered beneath towering chandeliers, the atmosphere heavy with perfume, gossip, and expectation. As they entered, Henrietta sensed the shift in the crowd. Curiosity sharpened into fascination. The cold Duke, partnerless for years, appeared suddenly with a woman whose presence had scarcely warranted notice weeks before. Whispers stirred like rising wind. Henrietta felt them grazing her skin, but Tristan's steady arm anchored her. Even so, she could not ignore the glances, some startled, some envious, some cruelly amused. The orchestra lifted into a sweeping waltz, and Tristan guided her toward the floor. For the first time, she felt the strength of his reputation shaping the space around them. People stepped aside instinctively, granting him a respectful berth that seemed almost ceremonial. Yet the moment their hands interlocked, the formality dissolved into something more fluid. His earlier stiffness had eased, his movements imbued with a quiet intention she had not witnessed in their rehearsal. Henrietta followed effortlessly, and together they danced in a harmony that caught even her by surprise. The murmurs around them shifted, still sharp, but tinged now with appreciation. When the dance concluded, Tristan offered a slight bow, not the perfunctory gesture he gave most partners, but one edged with acknowledgement. Though his expression remained composed, she sensed a subtle shift in their equilibrium. Something between them had altered, not through passion, but through unexpected compatibility. The following week brought several engagements, each one reinforcing the public illusion they were meant to maintain. Henrietta instructed him discreetly before each event, pointing out which expressions conveyed approachability and which revealed irritation. Tristan listened with an attentiveness she had not anticipated, adjusting his manner in ways that startled both acquaintances and rivals. Yet despite his growing ease with society, Henrietta noted that he reserved his rare moments of candor for her alone, an admission spoken without words, visible only in the faint softening of his features whenever she approached. One afternoon, before a late-season charity assembly, he presented her with a small parcel wrapped in crisp paper. "A practical necessity," he said, offering it without ceremony. Inside lay a pair of cream kid leather gloves, finer than anything she had worn in months. She touched the soft leather, speechless. Tristan misread her silence and added, "You will find they complement your attire appropriately. The ton notices such details." His voice carried its usual restraint, but his ears flushed faintly, revealing a discomfort he rarely betrayed. Henrietta thanked him, her gratitude quiet but sincere. The gesture, though framed as utility, revealed the first hint of personal regard, a nuance so delicate she hesitated to name it. Their closeness, however subtle, did not go unnoticed. The charity assembly brimmed with watchful eyes, and the moment Tristan offered Henrietta his arm, whispers reignited. Among them stood Lady Viola Selwyn, a young beauty whose envy flickered like a candle starved of air. Henrietta felt Viola's scrutiny, sharp and deliberate. Throughout the evening, Viola hovered near their orbit, her smile brittle, her gaze calculating. When Tristan escorted Henrietta to the garden terrace for a breath of cool air, Viola followed, lingering near the entrance as though awaiting proof of impropriety. Under the lantern glow of the terrace, Tristan leaned closer to Henrietta, his voice low. "She observes us. If she doubts our rapport, she will spread something unpleasant." His tone held equal parts warning and annoyance. Henrietta swallowed. "Then we should return inside, before more attention gathers." But Tristan did not move. He studied her for a slow, weighted moment, then murmured, "One convincing moment may stop her tongue." She barely had time to draw breath before he inclined his head, brushing his lips against hers with a deliberate gentleness entirely at odds with his reputation. It was meant to be nothing more than a demonstration, a defensive gesture meant for a spectator, but the careful, lingering pressure of his mouth ignited something far more dangerous, leaving her breath unsteady when he drew back. Viola fled, scandal ripening in her eyes. Henrietta's pulse thundered as Tristan's expression flickered with something unmistakably human. Surprise, perhaps regret, perhaps longing. But before either could speak, the distant swell of music reminded them they were no longer hidden. Their fragile illusion had just shifted into something neither had intended to confront. And the night's consequences were already gathering beyond the terrace shadows. Rain swept over London the following morning, as though the heavens themselves had chosen to echo Henrietta's turmoil. She had not slept. The memory of Tristan's kiss, meant only as a charade, played in her mind with relentless clarity. It was not the act itself that troubled her, but the truth buried beneath it. She had felt something she could not easily deny. Worse still, the whispers began before dawn. A maid at her lodging mentioned overhearing talk at the bakery, rumors of clandestine affection between the cold duke and his hired companion. Henrietta's cheeks burned with helpless indignation. She had tried to protect her dignity, but scandal had found her anyway, swift and merciless. She resolved to remain indoors that day, believing solitude might quiet the throb of humiliation. Yet solitude offered no mercy. The faint scent of his gloves, the warmth of his hand at her back, the startled softness in his expression after their kiss, each recollection unsettled her more than gossip ever could. She tried to busy herself with mending and reading, but neither task held her attention. By early afternoon, she surrendered to her thoughts entirely, leaning against the window and watching the rain thread silver lines across the glass. The steady rhythm soothed her, yet could not silence the creeping fear that Tristan might regret everything, that he might revoke their arrangement to preserve his unblemished reputation. A sudden knock jolted her from her reverie. Before she could compose herself, the door opened and revealed the last person she expected. Tristan stepped inside with a sharp breath, water clinging to his hair and coat, as though he had abandoned his carriage altogether and walked through the storm. The sight of him, usually so immaculate, struck her speechless. He removed his gloves slowly, and she noticed the tremor in his hands, faint but unmistakable. "Miss Blythe," he said quietly, his voice carrying an unfamiliar roughness. "I trust one am not intruding." "You are," she replied before caution could restrain her. "But intrusion seems inevitable today." His jaw tightened, though not in anger. "I suppose I deserve that." She folded her hands in front of her, willing her heartbeat to steady. "Why have you come, Your Grace?" To speak plainly, he moved further into the room, ignoring the droplets that darkened the floor. "There are rumors spreading, rumors I failed to prevent. I wish to ensure you heard the truth from me, rather than the city's vultures." Henrietta forced a calm breath. "The truth being that your impulsive gesture last night has trapped me in a storm I cannot weather alone." His gaze lowered, a fleeting sign of regret. "The truth, Miss Blythe, is that I acted without anticipating the consequences. I intended only to silence Lady Selwyn's interference. And instead, you ignited precisely what she wished to provoke. A silence settled, a silence weighted with unspoken fears and confessions." Tristan examined her with intensity, as though waging an internal battle he had long avoided. "I do not deny my miscalculation," he said, softer, "but I did not come here to justify myself. I came," he paused, searching for the right word, "to apologize." Henrietta blinked, stunned. A duke apologizing was rare. Tristan Harland apologizing bordered on myth. Yet the humility in his posture, the tension lining his features, revealed sincerity rather than performance. "I did not expect you to take such trouble on my behalf," she murmured. "It is no trouble." His voice lowered. "It is responsibility. Something I have carried my entire life, often to excess. But in this matter, I find the weight different." "How so?" "Because it concerns you." Her breath caught. He took another hesitant step toward her, rainwater pattering onto the rug. "Miss Blythe," he continued, "you believe I feel nothing, and perhaps my manner invites such assumptions. But I assure you, your presence has never been insignificant. I have merely lacked the means to express what I myself do not fully understand." Henrietta felt warmth rise beneath her ribs, a fragile hope she struggled to suppress. "Your Grace, I fear I am the last person who should complicate your life further." "And yet you do," he said, almost bitterly. "With a quiet efficiency I cannot disentangle." He reached into his coat and produced a slender volume bound in deep green leather. She recognized the script embossed on the cover, a collection of pastoral poetry rarely discussed in fashionable circles. He extended it toward her with an uneasy expression. "This is something I value," he said. "I once believed such things should remain private, but I thought you might understand its significance." She opened the book carefully. Marginal notes adorned nearly every page, written in a hand precise yet expressive. She felt as though she were holding a piece of him he had never shared with anyone. "You read this?" she whispered. "Frequently," he confessed. "When Parliament grows intolerable. When society grows louder than its worth. I thought of you while reading it these past weeks. Your composure, your resilience." Her heart softened despite herself. "You astonish me, your grace." "I astonish myself," he replied, the faintest smile touching his lips before fading. "Yesterday's kiss. I did not anticipate its effect, not upon society, nor upon me." The admission hung between them, fragile as glass. Henrietta closed the book, her fingers trembling. "What is it you wish for me now?" Tristan exhaled slowly, as though shedding years of practiced restraint. "I wish for honesty. If the world forced my hand, if circumstances demanded I choose you, would you condemn me? Or would you allow me the chance to try, even if I come to you imperfectly?" The question pierced her with its vulnerability. She stepped closer, close enough to see the uncertainty in his eyes, a man stripped of the armor that had shielded him for years. Gently, she touched his cheek, her fingers brushing the faint stubble he had not bothered to shave in his haste. He closed his eyes briefly, the simplest touch unraveling his composure. "I do not condemn you," she whispered, "but I cannot answer yet, not while fear still clouds the truth." He opened his eyes, acceptance and longing warring quietly within them. "Then I will wait." The storm outside deepened, but inside the small room, something delicate had shifted. Something that promised the story between them was far from finished. The scandal crescendoed with ruthless efficiency, reaching every drawing room and tea table before the week had ended. Henrietta heard it whispered in doorways, disguised as pity yet edged with glee. The Duke of Ashworth had been compromised by his hired companion, and society was hungry for blood. She kept to her modest lodging, fearing each knock upon the door might bring news that the Duke wished to sever ties. Yet Tristan did not send word. His silence troubled her more than any rumor. He was a man of decisive action, not absence. She wondered if he battled private demons or simply sought the correct angle from which to preserve them both. Still, uncertainty gnawed at her, until a formal invitation arrived to the Wycliffe Assembly, written in Tristan's own hand. There was no explanation, only a line: "Your presence is required. Trust me." Her breath trembled at the simplicity of it. The evening of the assembly carried a tension that shivered through London's elite. Carriages lined the cobblestones outside Wycliffe Hall, their lamps glowing like suspended moons. Henrietta stepped from the hired carriage alone, her heart pounding beneath the modest gown she had mended twice in 1 week. Inside, the ballroom glimmered with candles, gilded molding, and expectant faces. Every whisper quieted when she entered, creating a pressure that nearly drove her back toward the doors. Before she could retreat, a figure emerged through the crowd with the singular confidence of a man unaccustomed to yielding. Tristan moved toward her, immaculate in black and silver, his expression resolute. A collective murmur rippled through the hall as he offered his arm, not discreetly, but boldly, as though daring anyone to question his choice. "You came," he said quietly. "You summoned me," she replied, trying to mask her trembling. He inclined his head. "I intend for tonight to correct what has gone amiss." She wanted to ask what he planned, but he guided her forward before a word could form. Their movement drew the attention of the entire assembly. Every gaze followed them, as though they were an unfolding spectacle. Tristan's grip was firm, not possessive but protective, and the weight of it steadied her. He led her toward the center of the ballroom, stopping beneath the great chandelier, whose crystals caught the candlelight like suspended stars. When he released her arm, he did so with ceremonial precision, allowing the room a moment to grasp the significance of the tableau. The Earl of Wycliffe stepped forward, prepared to begin the evening's announcements, but Tristan lifted a hand, an unprecedented interruption. "My lords and ladies," he said, his voice carrying through the hall with commanding clarity. "Before tonight's festivities commence, I beg your attention. A matter of importance must be addressed. The room held its breath. He turned slightly, allowing the crowd a clear view of Henrietta. "I have heard," he continued, "the rumors concerning Miss Blythe and myself. Rumors born of malice, ignorance, and a willful misunderstanding of character." His gaze swept the crowd, cool and unyielding. "Let it be known that Miss Blythe is guilty of nothing, save for teaching a man long thought heartless the nature of genuine warmth." The shock was immediate. Gasps, stifled exclamations, even a dropped fan clattering against the floor. Henrietta felt heat surge to her cheeks, but she did not look away. His defense was not merely bold, it was revolutionary. Dukes did not make public declarations. Dukes did not humble themselves before society. And they certainly did not expose vulnerability for the sake of a woman whose standing had withered. Tristan continued, his voice deepening with certainty. "I have been accused of coldness all my life. But if warmth is measured by one's ability to recognize worth, then allow me to say plainly, Miss Blythe possesses more grace and integrity than any person in this room." A hush fell, so complete that even the musicians stilled. Then, with a breath that seemed to steady the very air, Tristan dropped to one knee. The room erupted into stunned silence. A duke kneeling was an act bordering on sacrilege. Henrietta gasped, her hand rising to her lips as Tristan reached for her trembling fingers. "I care not for precedence or expectation," he said softly, though his words carried with unwavering conviction. "Henrietta Blythe, I ask you, publicly, irrevocably, will you allow me the honor of marrying you, and thus granting me the chance to live not in duty, but in truth?" Her vision blurred. For a moment she could only feel the thrum of her heart, the warmth of his hand, the magnitude of his risk. She saw the vulnerability in his eyes, stripped of title and armor, revealing the man beneath the marble. The same man who had once told her she was not wife material. The same man who now knelt, offering everything he had never been taught to give. "Yes," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "Yes, Tristan." His eyes closed briefly, relief softening his features before he rose and pressed her hand to his heart. The room erupted, some in applause, others in disbelief, but none dared confront the Duke's choice. For the first time since her father's passing, Henrietta felt the mantle of shame lift from her shoulders, replaced instead with a warmth she had scarcely dared to imagine. The wedding came swiftly, held in the serene intimacy of Ashworth Manor's chapel. Sunlight spilled through stained glass, painting them in gentle hues as Tristan vowed devotion with quiet fervor. Henrietta repeated her vows with steady conviction, her voice carrying the strength of every hardship she had endured. When they sealed their union with a kiss, slow, tender, unmasked, the world beyond the chapel seemed to soften, as though finally granting them reprieve. That night, as lanterns glowed across the manor grounds and the scent of fresh rain drifted through open windows, Henrietta understood something profound. The cold Duke had never been cold at all. He had simply been waiting for a hand brave enough to reach through the frost. And now, together, they stepped into the warmth neither had known they were capable of creating.